This is your floor. This is not the end. And that's how it always has been with compliance. It's a gateway drug to the real thing. And so we see an opportunity with AI to really raise our floor so we can focus more on the diagnosis and judgment and opinion that I think is really where our value comes in.
Hi everyone, Claire here, producer of All Aboard. Agentic AI is the buzzword you're hearing just about everywhere. But have you ever wondered, what is your auditor going to think about all of this? Our host, Alex Bovee, sat down with Brad Thies, founder and president of BARR Advisory, to answer this very question. Brad shares his perspective on how AI is raising the floor for compliance, why strategy needs to come before technology, and how auditors and security leaders can embrace this shift without losing sight of security fundamentals. It's a forward-looking conversation on identity, risk, and the future of compliance in this new AI era. Let's get started.
Brad, thanks for joining, man. I appreciate it. Looking forward to a conversation today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, of course. And then if you wouldn't mind, just a quick intro on yourself. Who are you? What do you do? Tell us about BARR.
Yeah, so BARR, just real quick, we're a cybersecurity and compliance professional services firm. My background was originally in accounting, and I realized that I didn't like it after an internship, and then asked all the accounting firms out there if they had anything besides accounting, and that's how I got in the advisory track. And I worked a lot in telecoms, big telco back in the day, and then this thing called the cloud came up that was really the launching off point of starting BARR Advisory at my previous firm. We didn't fit it wasn't really the target client. And then, nowadays cloud's ubiquitous. So what we really focus on is helping clients really build trust within their ecosystem. And so here we are. We love it. Learned a lot, do a lot of audits, do a lot on the consulting side as well to stand up cybersecurity programs, and we're having a lot of fun.
It's a good place to be. The business, I'm sure, is booming because everyone cares about cybersecurity, and obviously advisory and compliance is a part of that. So one of the things we're going to dive in and talk a lot about today is the agentic wave and what that's doing from a security and identity perspective. I think it feels nascent, but it also feels just hyper relevant, and there's a huge impact to how folks think about cybersecurity, how they think about their compliance programs. So was really excited to dive into that and explore a few of the areas around that. So maybe just as a starting jump off point, can you share just your thoughts as an auditor, as an advisory firm? How are you guys starting to think about this wave of agentic AI? And maybe what are some of the leading indicators of impacts that's potentially going to have on your clients?
Well, yeah, it's a wave. I don't think it's just another wave too. I think it's really a chance to raise the floor. Ben Hardy has this construct or framework of frame, floor, and focus. And I think a lot of it is about how we think about wherever a firm wants to go, whether it's a professional service firm like us or our clients, they're always looking to accelerate growth typically. And there's lots of ways to do that, but AI is an option. And when I say about raising the floor, to raise your ceiling, you also have to raise your floor in what you say no to. And it's giving a lot of opportunities with our clients and ourselves to raise that floor. And from our perspective, it's like thinking about you go to a doctor's office and you get your checkups. They diagnose you and say, okay, here's the labs that we should order. We'll send the labs out to a place and get it back, and then they give you that advice. So from our perspective, our professional opinion is what matters. The independence and impartiality that we have in the public is what matters. But we spend a lot of time doing a lot of analysis as well, evidence gathering, working through different evidence, and we're essentially acting as the lab and the doctor at the same time. And so we see an opportunity with AI to really raise our floor so we can focus more on the diagnosis and judgment and opinion that I think is really where our value comes in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And across your clients, I think one of the things I'm still candidly trying to figure out is where everyone is in this agentic AI adoption wave. And there's a lot of different flavors of it. There's obviously products putting AI into their products. There's people trying to build AI agents to automate tasks that maybe were performed by a human previously or not performed at all. But how are your clients maybe, and I don't know if you could, pick on one or two people or just speak broadly to it, either one's fine, but how are you starting to see folks actually adopt AI in their enterprises today?
Well, I think there's it's in the empowerment curve. And so I think everybody's on their own different journey. And so
that's the fact.
So I think I'll give a few examples in a second. But I think to start, like sometimes it's part of just breaking down the complexity of just interacting with a different type of, whether you're interacting directly with AI or an agent. And at some point the light bulb goes off. You're like, wow, this is really cool. Like I can do everything with it. And then, I don't have to do anything any work anymore. But then there's this reality that sets in that it is a lot of work, and it's a shift in the way we think about things. And so then there's some acceleration, and you go forward and so forth. A lot of the AI that comes to us is more marketing today. It's a wrapper on top of it. So our challenge often is just really assessing whether they're really using AI, or are they developing it, or what it actually is. So that's the biggest use case. So I mean, from our perspective, a lot of our clients are getting out of the workflow business altogether, and thinking about it in the construct of how can we leverage these agents and give them better direction and objectives. So one client, for example, is doing a lot of work with very large, the Googles and Adobes and very large clients of the world that they need to help gather their information. And they work with the HR systems, and they developed this very nice work system that all of a sudden, with the use of agents, they can bypass a lot of these workflows and leverage the agents altogether. But it takes a lot to adopt that, and it takes a big mind shift as well.
I can imagine. And one of the side effects of that, I'm sure, as well, is just risk. And the idea of autonomous agents running around an organization, automating workflows in potentially non-deterministic ways is not without its own set of risks. And so how are you thinking about risk management, and how are your clients thinking about risk management as it relates to agentic AI and what they're adopting there, and starting to use AI to actually perform some of the automation tasks?
Mm-hmm. I think there's risks involved that I think for us, I don't think it's really new risk. Mm-hmm. And so you can talk about the explainability of AI. I think that's a big challenge. It's kind of a black box still. The inputs and the outputs. Like, how did I make those decisions, right? So that's real. And there's lots of other things that we can get into, some of those newer type risks. But the fundamentals are ever more important today. And so it's the basics. It's, do you know where your data is? Do you know where it's going? And what AI has done, though, is it's just challenged enough to things accelerate. So a risk that maybe was a lower risk before, then you start to adopt AI and data starts exploding, then it just magnifies the impact, I would say, is the biggest thing. And that's a big emphasis with ISO 42001, is it's not so much about here's some prescriptive controls and here's some prescriptive risks you got to think about, but what it's done, in contrary to some of the other standards, is focused more on the impact, and have you had the discussions within your company about the impact of things that you're doing with the adoption of AI, and because that's how you can back into the right risk for your specific use case.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it also strikes me, it definitely rings true that data is the biggest risk here, because the access and the speed at which AI can discover data, use data, and if you don't have the controls in place, that's obviously like a massive problem. It's just it feels like a real latent risk there, I guess, in some ways. And I know a lot of companies are experimenting with, how do we enforce access controls across these data layers? How do we do DLP on what the agents are able to do? What do you think is going to be the rate limiter to adopting AI in organizations? Is it actually that data control? Is it access and governance? Is it just visibility across the AI themselves? Because the thing I hear constantly is exactly what you said as well, which is AI is kind of a black box. It's very hard to inspect sometimes what the AI is actually doing. And most companies are not comfortable with non-deterministic workflows and outcomes, particularly as it relates to providing access to autonomous systems to perform actions.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I mean, we're not in the days, when I first started auditing where you have a SQL database and then you can go in and know exactly where your data is. There's no kind of in APIs coming in and out, but you know where that data is. And so a lot of it's focused on, at least from the audit perspective and security perspective, you know where things are and it doesn't move as fast as it does today. And so I do think, though, if we zoom out a little bit, it's easy to get caught up in the technology hype and without a clear strategy. And so a strategy absolutely always has to come first, and then the technology comes second. And so why that's important with AI is that if you don't have a clear strategy of where you're going to go, and yes, it's great to have an AI first initiative to say, AI, here's how AI can maybe solve this strategy that we're going to. You can't, it's hard to address the risk there. So you got to have a strategy first and then adopt the technology second. And then it's a lot easier than to say, usually the starting point is what's your acceptable use policy to a company? I mean, always the starting point that we advise all of our clients to is, okay, you want to get into AI. What is your strategy around it, and how are you going to communicate to your teams and stakeholders of what's acceptable for using AI?
It definitely feels like we've had a ready, fire, aim moment in AI right now, where a lot of, at least over the last year and a half, it felt like everyone had AI budgets. Everyone was running out to do a lot of things. What they were doing was kind of across the board. I'd talk to CISOs and they'd say, well, we're doing tons of things with AI. And then you double click on them and they're like, well, actually, we're just using like Cursor and Windsurf and like code generate. I'll say, okay, well, that's interesting, but that's not that's not the promised land of what AI is supposed to deliver for businesses. So it does make sense to me that like everyone's kind of taking a heartbeat now and saying, hey, what's our strategy? What use cases can we solve? And how are we going to secure that and have the right frameworks in place? Are you seeing, you mentioned ISO 42001. What are the interesting compliance frameworks and or thinking coming out of framework bodies around governing AI? And I guess, are there any interesting sort of nuggets or tidbits or thinking that are coming out of those in terms of how companies should be thinking about securing their AI?
I think the biggest challenge with it is that, as most time at the time that something's written down, it's too late to think about it. But I think what I like about the standards that are coming out is that it's very much a risk-based focused. And so you've got, the 42001, they've got it's a risk management component of it and focus more on the management system aspect of it. Where you go to the other end of the spectrum, that HITRUST has an AI certification that it gets very prescriptive. So it's got 80 controls that you can get more specific, but you read into the controls and a lot of them say the same thing as maybe traditional controls you'd expect around access management, change control. It just adds AI to it. So
and all of that, but with AI. It's like, okay.
Exactly. So I think, but what you can really glean from that is that the risk management component is the most important piece of it. And what ISO did is they said, okay, well, what do you mean by risk management? So you first got to define really how are you using AI? And so that's why I mentioned earlier around, are you just a user of it, where maybe you're spinning up some chat GPT and that's really the extent of it, Copilot, et cetera? Are you a developer of AI, or are you somewhere in between? And without that context or definition, your risk profile is going to be a lot different. And so
that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Actually, I mean, candidly, like I've not combed through the frameworks and seen what people are saying in these. So it's good to hear that at least the frameworks are there. They're starting to evolve. They're embracing it from a risk perspective. I mean, it sounds like all the right things. I mean, I guess, would you throw any stones at any of the frameworks or any, like any of the thinking that's been done so far? Like, are there gaps?
Well, I'll just, we do a lot of SOC 2. SOC 2 is not a good framework for doing AI. So I'll start with that now. But the lines of thinking are the right thinking, but it's just like any framework. It's a framework and you kind of have to choose your flavor that you feel like is going to adopt well in an organization. So I don't think there's not any stones I could throw at a particular framework other than maybe just how it's just like anything that's changed. There's going to be a lot that come out. Every state's coming out with their regulations. You got the EU AI Act. And we've been down this road before with like GDPR. And at some point, you kind of just have to start to adopt the one that's that's the strongest. But the best thing to do is just start with, your baseline and recognizing that these frameworks are, going back to that floor analogy, this is your floor. This is not the end. And that's how it always has been with compliance. It's a gateway drug to the real thing.
It's like it's the minimum set of things that you should be thinking about, but it doesn't mean it's best in class.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't get too caught up in like which framework to pick. I would just be focused on, going to one and really doing it really well and thinking through and engaging your stakeholders and how to think about the risk around it.
Yep. And then are you seeing any just new, on the thread of companies being on their own journeys around AI adoption? Are you seeing any new evolution of like evidence requirements or control requirements or classes of categories that are, that you think will be more prolific in the AI world?
I wouldn't say there's new control categories or new control like prescriptive requirements that I'd say but it's shifted more towards process focus. And so think about it. I'll use, confidentiality. There's always going to be a control around how you protect confidentiality. And from an audit perspective, maybe the old school way of doing it would be, okay, well, tell us where all of your data points are, and we'll go audit to make sure that they're not, exposed to the public or whatever. But I mean, this has happened even before AI with just how quickly things spin up and spin down. Instead of that's a very inefficient way to assess something. And so what I'd rather see is, so for example, AWS, maybe you define your classification. A lot of things are in confidential data is in S3 buckets, and you want to make sure that's not exposed to the public internet. Instead of auditing and sampling the different S3 buckets, look at the process about how those things are spun up to make sure you've got configuration in place to actually restrict that from happening in the first place. And same goes with change control. Focus on the CI/CD pipeline. When it comes to risk and how we think about change control, now we're getting into non-developers can spin up their own apps now. So what are some of the guidance that you're giving and lowering the friction point, just like what we had with Shadow IT, back in the day, is how can you get them to put their, apps they're vibe coding with and making sure that they're, pushing that stuff through, a proper CI/CD type pipeline. Taking a step back, it's really more about the process and looking further upstream of how we can find the right controls in the right area of the process versus kind of after the fact.
Right. Makes sense. So you're not in trouble and then digging yourself out of trouble.
Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. I mean, on that note, any advice you'd give to security and compliance leaders to make sure that they stay ahead of either audit requirements or security as it relates to AI? I mean, certainly it sounds like putting guardrails in place is one of those key recommendations, and having your frameworks pre-baked and pre-cooked for developers. Is there anything else that you've been thinking about and or giving recommendations around as you work with your clients?
First ask, I mean, if it's how do you partner with your firm? And so if you're getting audited, making sure that you have that relationship set up where you feel comfortable asking and, essentially airing your dirty laundry. It's okay. I mean, I think that's going back to the doctor analogy. For you to have a good relationship with somebody that can help diagnose and be objective, and kind of have that outside perspective, you got to be forthcoming. It's up to, the audit firms to establish that relationship, but it's also, it takes a two in a relationship. And so I think just making sure you're asking. We had a client that I remember we came on and started doing an audit, and they were just like, oh, I've been worrying about this for the past 6 months. and then they come to realize it, they come to experience it, and it's not as bad as it really is. Nothing in the world is ever as bad as it seems, or is a worst area as good as it seems, quite frankly. And so I think just coming out and asking, specific with AI though, the biggest thing, like I mentioned before, is got to double down on is strategy, technology, acceptable use policy, and continue to build from there. Beyond that.
I love this metaphor you have of the doctor's office, and you're the doc. It's like, just, you got to tell me how, like, kick your kids and the wife out of the room. You got to tell me everything.
That's right. Yeah.
What's going on? What are you guys doing right now for AI? Like, just tell me all the dirty secrets.
Yeah, what's the real deal? I mean, we're looking up to try to. There's some guardrails we got to put in place with this, because sometimes they're just it's like, sometimes you don't want to tell your doctor everything, but how can we replicate that?
How can they help you if they don't actually know?
Yeah, maybe there's a way we could replicate ourselves through an agent, so they can just act the way.
I mean, that's actually a good parting sort of last question. But how are you guys looking at using AI internally to either automate your own business or help your clients?
So we've learned a lot of lessons. We've done a lot of pilots, and I think we fall in the camp of that MIT survey that's going out with 95% of pilots failing. But we've learned a lot of lessons around that, and how we're looking. There's two camps that we're looking at. One is kind of, we call the front stage, how we're interacting with clients, and then the backstage. So we're focused right now on more the front stage aspect of it. So how giving our auditors more tools at their disposal to be focused on the client interview type process, so that we can get more real-time analysis. So as things come through, a readiness assessment is one of the biggest challenges, and meaning that trying to mitigate that concern that clients have before an audit. So you might have an automation tool, you might not have an automation tool, but you always are wondering what's the perspective of the auditor. And usually we're just trying to communicate and get on the same page of, what do you expect? What's your risks? And so we're building a lot of agents around how we can accelerate that process, so that we've got kind of our minimum standards that we have interpreted, and then the client has their own control set, so that we can filter through very quickly on what's the right control, tweak the language, what are controls that are just noise, versus the controls that we really want to focus on, and the scope. And so what we've learned is that there's a lot of tools out there on the market that, claim to do a lot of that stuff for you. But if you don't have that interaction, I think you were kind of alluding to this earlier, sometimes it's just kind of a wrapper within a software tool. But if you don't have that ability and to interact with whatever the output is, then it makes that explainability piece even more difficult. So a lot of the things we're doing right now is just, structuring different prompts to start to educate and inform a future agent that we're building right now. Then on the backstage side, there's just a lot of work that we got to do to structure our data sets to make sure that what we do pull is actually the right thing. So there's a lot of work on the backstage stuff.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. It's great doing. I know we covered a lot of topics, didn't go 10,000 feet deep on every single one, but I think this is just a really interesting topic. I know a lot of security practitioners that I talk to are thinking a lot about what audit compliance looks like in this AI agentic world, and it's a topic that I think is on everyone's mind. So thanks for being on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at ConductorOne. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductorone.com. Till next time.